So welcome back, it's Nick from the Coach Station, and today's a really special episode because I've got Kristen Paskins here, who is an adaptive player, a wheelchair player that's really taken padel on by storm. She's a player and she's now training with me to be a padel instructor, and I'm delighted to join Kristen today on the channel. And we've got some questions really to help you as coaches understand how perhaps that you could work with players with a disability, with an impairment, and with some wheelchair players. So I'm going to ask a few questions to Kristen, find out about her experiences, and then let's see if we can get some really valuable information for you to help you with your coaching. So here we go. So Kristen, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And could you just tell us about your experience really, and why you are now so involved in padel?
Well, for me, it's quite a sort of difficult journey, I think, getting to the point where I came into padel in the first place. So I actually lost my mobility in the year 2022, which actually isn't so many years ago when you think about it. At that time, I suffered a number of neurological symptoms, which then ultimately led to me being given a diagnosis of functional neurological disorder, which is a very misunderstood condition, and many people go on for a long time, trying to get a diagnosis. So that sort of medical journey in itself is very, very challenging. And as a result of the symptoms that I had and what I went through, I actually lost my mobility in a very short space of time. Going from someone who was very, very active, I grew up playing cricket, weekends after weekend, we're always traveling around, being at cricket clubs. I was brought up in a family that was very, very sporty, played a lot of tennis when I was younger. So for me, the experience of, in a very short space of time, I'm talking, a few weeks, going from being able to run around, being able to participate in sport, and then suddenly having all of those hobbies, all the things that really were part of my identity, suddenly were taken away from me. And that is an experience that no one ever in their lifetime really thinks will happen to them. But the truth is, 1 in 4 of us will have a disability at some point in our life. And it's important that we create the spaces, and we make sure those spaces are there for people to be able to adapt in the best way that they can. And sport is one of the best ways that we can help people build their confidence. If you're a wheelchair user, help build your wheelchair skills, because initially you don't have any of those. I mean, you don't know where to buy a wheelchair. You might not know anyone that's a wheelchair user to be able to show you how can you get your chair in and out of the car? How do you go to the supermarket independently? All of those things, that we take for granted as part of our everyday lives, they're heavily impacted by that huge change in our environment. And for me, that journey of about 1.5 years, I did nothing. I was working full time. I was very lucky to be able to carry on in my job in a very adapted way. But around me, all those hobbies, all my evenings, my weekends, the activities I used to do, I wasn't able to do those things anymore. And for me, it wasn't actually until I came into sport, and that was only January of last year. I came into wheelchair basketball first and then into padel later in the year. Actually becoming part of that community was the best thing that I ever did. And had I not been for sport, I certainly wouldn't be the independent wheelchair user I am today. So that's a huge thank you to all those people that inspired me to take.
Brilliant. And why padel? What specifically about padel? We have a lot of people who are viewing for padel and padel coaches. So what would you say? Why padel? Why is padel so good for somebody? As a sport itself.
So there's many elements to padel which for me were perfect for the time of life that I was in and the experience that I was having. So I found it really, really difficult when I lost my mobility to ever think about going into a sport that I used to play in a very different way. The idea of me being, even going into tennis, and I used to love tennis as a child, but you naturally do compare a lot to that sort of before life that you had. And padel, being such a new sport in the UK especially, was something that was a new challenge for me, and I can put my focus into it. It's a very adaptive sport because, we can play able-bodied players with wheelchair players, with amputee players. You can have everyone on the court at the very same time. And there aren't many sports where you're able to do that. So for me, being able to come onto a court with my dad, with my brothers, who, I was brought up with playing competitively, that was the very first time I was able to have that experience with them again. So for me, just that moment, that milestone of being back, having sport so much of a part of my identity again was really important. And the adaptability, accessibility of padel is huge. And that is why me, myself, the LTA as well, want to really bring the visibility for this sport as something that is for absolutely everyone. And that's what I hope to be able to do in the future as well.
Yeah, so brilliant. Thank you very much. Now, we've got a group of coaches watching. Now, if the coaches, some coaches are a bit apprehensive about working with players with disabilities, can you give some of your best advice if they were to work with somebody who has an impairment? Like, what would be your sort of best advice to the group of coaches about like how they could work best with players?
So I think the first thing to be really aware of is every person with their disability, with their impairment, they're at different stages. Some people are like me, at the very beginning, I didn't have a lot of confidence, I'd lost a lot of muscle strength, and actually to even turn up at that very first sports session for me, that was a huge deal. And therefore the coaches around me, they needed to first be aware of that, that they're working with someone who is feeling very vulnerable, very nervous, and slowly, gently help build up my confidence through that. So I think initially never make an assumption about someone's experience of their disability, whether, they're really, really experienced or whether they're very, very new. I think it's important that you have that conversation prior to the session to make sure that they can get the most out of that session as well. And also, I think it's important that if you aren't sure about what language to be using, do your research beforehand. I mean, I know lots of people can be very uncomfortable about saying things like, let's go for a walk or take a step back. For me as a wheelchair user, obviously that language might seem something that I'm not comfortable with, but actually when things are such a part of our general language, we're so used to it. I still use all those phrases, take the dog for a walk. And for many people, I'm sure it's very similar, but if you are nervous, do your research beforehand and make sure that you are comfortable with the language, make sure that you have a good awareness of what condition that person might have, and that will give you the best confidence to going into that first session.
Brilliant. And if you're going to adapt some activities, we've done some today, we've been adapting activities throughout the course using the STEP principle. And if you check one of my other videos, we've got some information on the STEP and you'll understand how to differentiate activities. Using that STEP principle, can you just give a couple of ideas like we've seen today, how you managed to adapt some of the exercises we did for non-disabled, for players with disabilities?
Sure. So as a wheelchair user, the way that we move can be very, very different. So whereas with running paddle players, typically you have the 4 different types of steps. So you might have a side step, you might have a run, you might have a back pedal, a cross step. With wheelchair paddle, obviously, we don't have the step. So how do we manage that? Well, what's really important, firstly, is to understand the movement of a wheelchair. So typically, wheelchairs for sport are very much like these ones, the one I'm sitting in today, and they will have very angled wheels, which gives them a lot of agility. They're able to spin really, really fast. You can move very, very fast. But obviously, we don't have that side movement. So what's really important is that when we're thinking about exercises and we're thinking about, okay, how am I going to show or demonstrate how we move towards a ball, or if we're turning and we're going to play a shot of the glass, how do we show that movement? Well, with a chair, the difference is we're only going to go forwards or backwards, and our very, very sort of fastest movement will always be a big push. So wherever we need to get somewhere quickly, refer to it as a big push to get there. If we're turning, we just call it a turn or a swivel. And it's just important that when it's demonstrating each of our tasks to our group of players, that we're thinking about that adaptive element, and we're thinking about, okay, make sure that everything that I'm explaining, you've already thought about, this is what you need to do if you're a wheelchair player, for example. So yeah, that's an example of how we can adapt some of those tasks.
Okay, so we might need, let's say, a bit more space. That would be using space, a bit more space to maneuver the chair in, for example.
Exactly.
And things like the task. So, for example, instead of collecting a ball off the floor or touching a cone, that you came up with the idea today of, instead of going to the floor because it's difficult to reach, your idea was then to
go to the glass. So we could tap the glass, tap the cage. And that just makes it a little bit easier for those who are wheelchair users. As reaching all the way to the floor, it might be that, it's very far away, even for me, and I have a bit of core strength. To touch the floor is quite difficult. But also we have lots of players who might not have that core strength, and they might be sat a bit further into their chair just for that support, and they won't be able to do that. So just have a think about, what is their width of movement? Can they turn themselves? And look at their mobility in terms of how we can adapt that particular task in the best way for that person.
Perfect. And the game of wheelchair paddle obviously has 2 bounces as well.
It is, yeah. So that is really one of the only rule changes. Other than that, and then we have the serve as well, that obviously we don't have the same movement, so we do have to turn the chair as we serve. There are a few things there can be a little bit different, but mostly when we think about what is the key difference between wheelchair paddle and typical paddle, it's that double bounce. And the reason we have that is because we, as much as we can give ourselves a lot of momentum to be able to move, the timing and the distance can be a little bit trickier than for those who have the agility, who are running. So therefore, having that double bounce does give you a little bit more time. Also, what we'll find as wheelchair players is you want to keep your momentum going at all times. But if you're moving all the way up to the net to do a volley, you often have to either be stationary or turn. But when you do that, actually, you're losing that time. We can't do the back pedal like other players can. So actually giving us that double bounce gives us that opportunity to stay more at the back of the court. Most wheelchair players will play very much from the back of the court, not moving so much to take the net position. There are a few examples where maybe you do that with a drop shot, etc. But typically staying at the back is kind of the safest space for us. And then we can move within our side of the court.
Yeah, perfect. And then the rule being on the serve that this can be from a higher position, from shoulder,
yes,
from that position rather than from the waist.
Exactly, yeah? Exactly. And for me, for example, I know that if I were to play lower down, I can't get that ball over the net. So just having that slight change of rule just gives me a bit more of an opportunity to play my ball into the serve box, which is our ultimate aim on the serve.
Brilliant. Kristen, that's been really, really helpful for everybody. Thank you very much. And where can, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, find out more about, somebody's watching, maybe you are a wheelchair user and you want to get involved in paddle and do more, or you're a coach and you want to find out a little bit more, how can they do that? How can they find out about your programs or whatever you're going to do?
Sure. So, to find out more about wheelchair paddle, we have the LTA website that gives us a lot of information about wheelchair paddle, adaptive paddle, how we can adapt those sessions to people with disabilities. But if you want to reach out, if you want to see a bit more about what I'm doing, I'm running sessions within the community. I have a lot of support from my club here at Paddle Maidenhead to run. We've got a competition actually coming on the 20th of September, and it's an international inclusive paddle tour tournament where we have adaptive players coming from all around the world to participate, which is a really, really exciting event. So if you are around and you live somewhere around the Berkshire area, do come along and come and see that. We're a lot of talent within the disability community, and I think that's something that's really important to share is, although we call it disability, actually the ability of so many of these players is more than you could ever imagine. We've got some real talent, and it's definitely worth coming to watch and seeing how that movement is a little bit different with those people with disabilities. You can also follow my Instagram. I am at Kristen Paskins on Instagram, so come and follow my channel, and I'll always keep updates with the tournaments that I'm doing every month with the Inclusive Paddle Tour. We're in different countries, so playing at different clubs, meeting lots of new people, trying to grow this adaptive community of paddle, which I think is going to be so big for the future, which is really, really exciting to be part of supporting the LTA with their program and helping build accessibility with paddle from the very beginning.
Brilliant. And I'm really looking forward to you for the rest of the course and wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thanks,
Good stuff. Hope you enjoyed it, and on to the next one.